I take heart from the situation where a Labour MP, the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Peter Kyle, made a mistake in which he inadvertently misnamed Humza Yousaf, the First Minister. He called Humza Mohammed during a live TV interview, and then at the first opportunity apologised and pointed that he'd made a mistake. And during the interview with Sky News' Neil Patterson, who asked the MP whether Mr. Yousaf should suspend Ms. Sturgeon from the party. Doesn't matter what he said about Ms. Sturgeon. What matters is the speed of his apology for misnaming Humza. Now, why is that important? Because there are many people who one might misname. I regularly misname the person who presents the show on Sunday morning, Laura Newsberg. I have every assumption that everybody knows exactly who I'm talking about, and I am vaguely entertained by the fact that that this is a person who can be identified as somebody who should be proclaiming the news without bias on the BBC. I'm sure that's exactly what she does. Humza is a slightly different matter, because Humza has already endured racial smears about his name. I know because I was involved in the story. And it goes back to 2015 and back to a man called David Coburn, who was the MEP, the only MEP for UKIP that was registered in Scotland. And he was on a radio phone-in programme with Humza Yousaf, or was supposed to be. It was about the issue of immigration, I think, the big immigration debate, which had taken place the day before on BBC Two. And Humza Yousaf and David Coburn were going to be debating this, and Humza was late. And the interviewer asked David Coburn if he knew where Humza Yousaf was, and David Coburn said, Humza Yousaf, or as I like to call him, Abu Hamza. A very funny little jibe. But the point is, you don't confuse a minister of the Crown with a convicted felon in a New York prison, simply because he has a name that seems to you to sound vaguely unusual. So not only is this a mistaking of names, it's and a linking of criminality, it's also quite clearly Islamophobic and racist. And I raised this issue directly with Nigel Farage, and Nigel Farage said, well, can't you take a joke? It's just a joke. Well, that's the point. David Coburn never apologised. He never resigned. Nigel Farage insisted to the end that it was just a joke, and he never contacted Humza Yousaf to apologise on Coburn's behalf. And the matter fizzled out, I suppose. And I made a fuss. I found myself on the BBC. I found myself on the front page of the Mail or something. And I think I was quoted as telling Mr. Farage that you can't toss this off over a pint of beer. If you want to be funny, then join Monty Python. Words I would stand by. I think there's a room for humour. I think there's a room for satire, and I think there's a room for playing around with people's names. But you have to be very careful, because if you're playing around with people's names on the basis of their racial or religious background, then this adds a new layer and a cheap layer to the satire. And so if I were Humza Yousaf, I would feel quite I would be quite aware of the fact that I had been attacked a few times for my name, and I would be quite sensitive about that. And I think Mr. Kyle is sympathetic and positive. And the fact that somebody happens to be in public life doesn't mean that their name should be attacked in that way, simply because it sounds unusual. And confusing Humza's name with Muhammad, I think, is in some senses rather a wonderful confusion, and I'm sure Humza would be charmed to be called Muhammad. And certainly as we get to the end of Ramadan, by the way, Ramadan Mubarak, or Eid Mubarak, as we should say very shortly. By the time we get to the end of Ramadan, the memory of the Prophet is important, and so I don't think that's as grotesque a misnaming as the one that David Coburn chose. David Coburn, now a non-person, no longer an MEP, no longer of any significance, and we no longer hear of him. But his apology is still overdue. I certainly would like to hear it. I'm sure Mr. Yousaf would like to hear it. And I'm sure Mr. Kyle would be charmed to hear it. The longer you avoid apologizing for racist behavior, the more people you have to apologize to. But certainly that was racist. It may have been intended as a joke, but that's the point. Casual racism is still racism.